Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to DNA Behavior's presentation of Behaviorally Smart Communication Discovery. This is our Sales and Wealth Management Engagement webinar. Your hosts today are Leon Morales, our Chief Relationship Officer, and I am Trip Rockwell, your Chief Marketing Officer. A few notes about today's webinar. We will be recording this for future posterity. We'll send a link to you once it's complete. So you'll have that as a reference material later on. We'll also be emailing over a copy of the deck, so you'll have full access to all those parts and pieces. We also encourage you, as part of our registrants, our attendees, you're able to go out and take your own profile, and then some of the material will make that much more sense when you see how you come up, and we're happy to review those at a later date. For other housekeeping, we will keep this to under an hour, so give you back a few minutes of your day, and then also know that the audio is turned off so that there's not a lot of cross chatter, but we do please welcome you to use the chat box or the question box. I'll be monitoring that throughout the webinar so that any good information that comes up, we're happy to share. Also know that so that we kind of keep everybody up to speed, that there will be several poll questions released throughout the webinar, so that we're all on the same page and getting the information and kind of see where everyone is. Some of them involve other educational pieces that we cover as part of our platform and how they all feed into one another. There'll also be a survey at the end of the webinar, and again, we encourage you to participate. It helps us decide and work out what our next educational offerings may be, so try and keep you interested and posted along those lines. As part of that, we give out a unlocking guide. It's kind of just a off-cuff way of being able to engage folks with different styles, and today's styles being more communication-based. We also get into personality and behavior beyond that, but it all comes full circle for getting a full profile of your teammates, of your friends and family, but for work and business. So without further ado, I will hand the reins over to Leon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trip, and welcome everyone. So Communication DNA, we don't often feature as a company. Trip and I lead about 3 webinars a month, and this one gets covered probably a couple times a year, but it's got such power to it that it's a lot of fun to actually cover, but it's also something that's very simple to implement or to use. So the objectives of the webinar today are really around communication, really building sort of a strong communication sort of process, really helping to close a relationship gap. And then the Communication DNA tool that we'll reference here, or the solution, we'll talk a lot about sort of what that is and how it works. And then the point number 3 is understanding your communication and how it's different from others. Sort of the 4 profiles, we'll cover those in a little bit more detail. And then actually using Communication DNA in an engagement process. We'll cover a little bit around technology integration. We'll just cover that lightly, but it'll be a pretty sort of a robust presentation around Communication DNA, because there's a lot of applications that you can use it. It's not just a profile. There's just a lot of elements to it and hopefully we've outlined this in the presentation that will flow very nicely so you understand it. But recognize that if you do have a question on something, Trip is monitoring the chat box, and he's great at covering that. Anything that's really beneficial for the entire group, we'll cover at the very end of this. So we'll get started. And there's a reference here from Harvard Business Review back in 2002 that 87% of measurable sort of issues in a business are really communication related. And those of you that actually work sort of in organizations or in client services probably have seen this. I've always said that it's rarely about technology. It's really about how people communicate back and forth within the team or within that client experience that gets misinterpreted. But it's a pretty high percentage of missed expectations, or people expect something that maybe they didn't get, and it causes sometimes significant blockages in a business. So what we do with trying to really shorten that 87% of those misfires in communication is use a tool, really a communication-driven process around communication differences. And you'll see here illustrated by these colors. You got the blue, which we will cover in a little bit of detail, but it's called a goal setter. And Tripp and I are both what we call goal setters as a primary. And then the second one is a lifestyle. This third one is information, and this fourth one is stability. And they all have very different sort of needs in communication, and they actually operate very differently. But poor communication, or that 87% that we reference, really is because you're usually talking to someone that's actually outside of your communication zone, or that quadrant. But it can really lead to those blockages and ultimately lack of trust. And once you have lack of trust, it's going to be hard really to even have a good client experience or a good working relationship with anyone. And what we really try to work here is moving to much better communication, where this puzzle all fits together around, clarity, situations, actually getting things done within the team. It's a very simple process. Sounds easy. It's probably harder to implement because it does take human beings to understand it, to be able to execute on it, and actually be able to use it in a sustainable way. So this slide, it talks about reframing communication, and really this is important to know because, and I'll use the example, we have one of our team members that is that stability type, represented by that green piece of the puzzle. You remember, Tripp and I are both what we call goal setters. So when we're actually working with this team member, we probably have very different communication styles to hers and her to us. So it can actually create issues for us if we're not careful. So she needs more information typically than maybe either one of us would provide. But that's really around reframing communication. So she now knows if I need to get something from Leon and Tripp, then I need to actually reframe how I ask the question. That can really make a huge difference in that. And this particular slide here talks about persona models. If you actually use it in reframing the message, you're going to have a much better outcome in people understanding what they need and actually being able to convey that. Because we all have very different ways of communicating. We probably don't even consciously bring it up or talk about it. So that's what we really talk about in this slide, is reframing it for better results. And we do that. We work with a lot of firms around this concept of matching sort of behavior with the sales teams, clients, just anyone that's sort of a client relationship. But build that tailored communication based on that communication style. It's going to build long-term trust in helping in making better decisions. And then if you're actually using it with sales teams, and many do, you may have, you could get it down to where you're actually having your account executive being able to use it with the client. You're going to have a much better level of engagement between both partner companies. But it leads to higher engagement because people really feel like you're actually concentrating or giving them sort of what they need. And we'll get into a little deeper around what those insights are needed by each of those four groups. But I just wanted to, the takeaway here is that you can really tailor the communication and build a team just based on knowing these behavioral insights. We do have a question. Show up. Poll question.
All right, everybody. Just to get a quick feel for the room is, are you currently using a behavioral technology tool? And we'll just get a quick cross-section of folks and share the results. And looks like a bunch of new folks to the table here might not have something perfect in place, or maybe an off-cuff type way of managing those engagements. But we'll discuss more of that here shortly. Thanks.
So the ones that the 25% that use some tool, and there's a wide range of tools that companies use, and I think we're certainly of the opinion if you're using something, that's great. Some companies teach sort of how understanding communication patterns. I think that's a little more difficult to do because you just have to keep going back and understanding or retraining new folks that come in. So if you have sort of a methodology and a behavioral tool that you're using, great. If you don't, certainly, hopefully you'll look at Communication DNA as a vehicle to be able to do that, because I think it works very well and it's extremely simple to implement. So here we have a client-centered business, and you can see here that a team without any kind of behavioral insight is out there, and you will probably, we all do this. I mentioned Tripp and I are both goal setters, which is this blue. We tend to actually give information based on our communication sort of wiring. That's just how we do it. So if you're working with me and Tripp, you would actually see it's about getting to the bottom line, talking about sort of opportunities, and being fairly direct as we can based on sort of our information. But that's just, not everybody's going to need that. In fact, the people that would probably be more difficult for us to connect with, which would be the stability types, which really want more sort of harmony in the workplace. Not that we don't want that, but they would really look for that. They would look for that warm and friendly environment. And when Tripp and I are sort of in our heads down getting things done, that's probably what we don't sort of give off, is that more stability type. But, they like to talk through things. They need a little bit more guidance. So you can see where you can have some team differences just, with people that you work with day to day. So that goal setter is really around sort of get things pretty quickly, keep it fairly high level, and then talk about sort of a way to get things solved. The lifestyle individual is really around actually pretty openness, pretty outgoing. They like sort of connecting with people. They like graphics. They like things to be visually appealing, but they also work pretty fast-paced as well. Then when you get down to the stability type, that's when you start seeing a little bit more. I need a little bit more information, and I want to understand what I'm getting into before I say yes. But they can also feel overpowered by those two top boxes, that goal setter and the lifestyle. Sometimes when they're working with them, they can feel overpowered by those folks. And then the information types, they're the ones that really need a lot of information. And those of you that are on the call that are information types, you may not know you are, but they typically need information to feel comfortable before they can make decisions. So for those of us that are in that goal setter category, we typically see that as slowing us down when people are asking for questions. I need more documentation. So you can see in the work environment, or when you're actually working with a client, how that can be challenging. But once you know what their communication DNA style is, at least it gives you sort of the understanding that, if you're working with a goal setter, keep it pretty fast-paced, high level. Same with the lifestyle, but also make it fun and energetic, and a little bit about who they connect with. And then when you're working with the stability types, make sure that you're attending to those needs around that harmonious environment. Check in with them, because they may not be real comfortable to be real outgoing or boisterous around something. And then your information types, really around information need to be able to analyze before they can make decisions. And that's where you really connect with having a behaviorally sort of connected team, because you really do know how to be able to do that. You're reframing conversations, and it really does help build a more behaviorally smart organization. And there's a reference here of the 23% revenue uplift, and that actually is from Gallup, that when you actually do have a much better understanding, your culture actually becomes much more cohesive, and your clients will see a much more sort of firm that really caters to their needs. And then in wealth conversations, when you think about working with in a wealth management firm or any financial advisory firm, these goal setters really are on goals, actually getting things done on, wealth transfer. Inheritance is really something that, on the lifestyle, making sure that people have what they need to have a lifestyle that they're accustomed to. And the stability type, it's around family relationships. And then your information types would be much more about the investments, the actual data for those. So that helps in framing conversations when you know that you're going to be dealing with the goal setter or a stability type when they're coming in, what types of things to really tailor the conversation around. If you start talking about goals with the stability type, they will probably start getting tuned out pretty quickly. But if you actually approach them in family sort of terms around the family, the family stability, things that they need to think about for the family, planning, they'll be very invested in that. And in the DNA discovery process, we have disclosed here around the discovery, the tools, the system, you're really enhancing that long-term relationship with the client. And those firms that do use communication DNA, really see the benefit of their team knowing this. So when a client does come in, they create an experience that really sort of matches that communication style. It really does develop a very deep client-centered experience for your clients. And then you're also working with your employees and understanding their sort of styles as well, because they're going to be different, around your messaging as a leader. Because if you're only doing a one-way communication based on your style, you might be missing the other four types. You can use it with organizational change management. In fact, I think it's important when there is a big change coming through that you really know what those communication styles are, because help people through the change. Your stability types are going to be a little bit harder to get through because they may not understand, at a high level how things are going to get done. They may need a little more information. Using it in service delivery can be used. Sales training, solution mapping, and even behavioral marketing. When you're actually in a firm, when you're doing targeted marketing, if you knew the behavioral style of each of your clients or who you're actually going to be sending that out to, if you send a lot of information to a goal setter, they'll probably toss it. If you send a lot of information to a stability type, they'll probably get frozen. If you send it to an information type, they'll read it. So it really is important to target market using that behavioral marketing approach. So that's really enhancing a long-term, all of the tools that you can sort of use in extending that long-term relationship. And here we have, in our methodology that we use a forced choice model. So here you have two of our assessments here. One is the communication DNA, which we're focused on today, is a 12-question, takes about 2 to 4 minutes, maybe 5 to complete. It's pretty easy to do, and it measures this communication, natural behavior, and it's very accurate. You can really gain a lot of information just by those 12 questions. Then over here, just to reference it, we've got another tool we call Business DNA Natural Behavior or Financial DNA Natural Behavior. It's the same assessment, but it really uncovers at a deeper level this natural behavior. But I wanted to point that out because there's what we call level 2 behaviors. We measured level 1 here in natural instinctive with our forced choice model, but in level 2, it's called learned behavior. It's the things that we learn in our lifetime experiences, relationships. So you really have this element here that you may have a strong goal setter, but they may actually be able to, be a little bit more, sort of exhibit some lifestyle behaviors. But you're going to naturally, if you're targeting your communications based on what their natural behavior is, you're going to have a much better success of connecting with them and keeping things moving within that relationship. And here's an example of the communication DNA, and what it enables is communication to be understood, and then communication, with a different person. We're going to go through that in a couple slides from now and how that actually works, and then relationships based on trust. If you actually communicate with people sort of in their terms or in their zone, it's going to naturally build some trust. I mean, that's not 100% of it, but it's going to lead to a much better outcome versus if you approach somebody with your own style, let's say it's a really strong goal setter and it's a stability type, it's probably not going to lend to a lot of trust right from the start. So to teach communication DNA, this is one of our our charts that's frequently used on how to adapt. So we've talked a lot about the 4 types: goal setter, lifestyle, stability, and information. So a quick way to think about it is when you actually hear somebody that speaks pretty directly and candidly, it's usually a sign they're a goal setter. If they're pretty open and engaging, sort of, life of the party, you can probably bet they're a lifestyle type. If they tend to be a little bit more reserved but warm and friendly when you do connect with them, that's usually a stability type. And then an information type might ask a lot of questions, almost appear to be very detailed. Usually that's a sign that's an information type. So guidance is here. Goal setters, allow them to discuss it. That's how they learn. Lifestyle, allow them to see it. That's how they learn. Stability, allow them to feel it, because they'll really start feeling comfortable and then open up. And then for information types, allow them to read it, because they really want to understand the data before they actually can make decisions. So there's also the strength, but there's also the struggle that we all have. And depending on sort of any day, when you're feeling a little bit stressed, these are things that can emerge. For the goal setter, can be very abrupt, can interrupt, may not listen real well. For the lifestyle, may be very transparent and disclose information that, might not necessarily be appropriate. They're uninhibited when they're sort of in the zone, and that can be the struggle. For the stability type, they may compromise, they may feel overpowered, and they want to be diplomatic, so they will actually might be nodding in the meeting, yes, I agree, but then leave and sabotage whatever they agreed to do, just because they didn't want the pressure of being on the spot. And then for the information types, they can be very modest, and they may be pretty serious. Teaching them to be a little bit lighter and sort of be comfortable with that. It's not easy to do, but you can sort of help them with that. And what do they need? Get to the bottom line with the goal setters. Very important. Present options. You can make a lot of gains just by doing those two simple things. For the lifestyle, keep it open, keep it broad. Don't get into a ton of detail, because they will probably shut down pretty quickly if you provide too much detail. Time and a place for that. For the stability types, keep it very relaxed. Keep it harmonious, because that's going to be important. And then share some feelings around that. May not be comfortable for the strong goal setter to do that, but you will build a lot of trust with that stability type. And then for the information types, it's around facts, demonstrating transparency, because if they feel there's anything hidden, they'll actually immediately go to that distrustful spot. So this is a great chart of really how to adapt that. You can actually, even if somebody hasn't completed the 12 questions, you can gain some insight into what they are, but I can tell you having the data makes a huge difference, because sometimes it can be misleading. People act as other people do. That whole follow the herd mentality. So sometimes you may actually meet somebody that appears to be a goal setter, but they may not be. So there's, some things just because they've been conditioned to it in society. And as we work with firms, behavioral discovery leads to higher engagement. I see it over and over again. This number one, reduces decision-making biases, because you're actually sort of meeting the terms of how they like to make decisions. A very big impact in the business. Helping them increase decision-making. For those stability types, they tend to be a little bit more cautious and may doubt themselves. But if they know that sort of you've made it pretty comfortable for them in helping them understand sort of their information as they make decisions, it really increases their comfort level and confidence about making decisions. And then just a higher level of communication. People feel very much they're part of an organization when they feel like you've communicated on their terms. We have another poll question, poll number 2.
All right. Based on what we just covered, so behavioral discovery leads to, and you've got several options here, reducing decision-making bias, increasing decision-making comfort, a higher level of employee-client connectivity, or all of the above. And try to make it as complex as we could. But of course, all the so we're picking up what you're putting down, Leon. I appreciate that.
Wait, awesome. So that is 100%. So that's great.
All the above.
It really does. There's some very simple things you can do to really keep not only your your team connected, but also your clients. So I'm switching a little bit, talking about the 4 different profiles and how they operate. So in some of the firms we work with, they really want to be much more of an integrated sort of a digital experience. So in that, they really like to be able to kind of match people to the right individuals. So this technology transforms the client experience. We work with a number of firms on integration, but you can really, through the life cycle of that client or that experience, really help transform the business by tailoring the workflow, customizing the experience from the time the client comes into the office until the time they've either signed the agreement or been serviced, whatever that would look like. And then developing, part of this tool set is developing these really powerful discovery questions that, are thought-provoking for that individual, that maybe somebody hasn't asked them before. It can be quite important. But customizing the messages, these are all part of that life cycle transformation in the business, and it's pretty cool to be part of that. So it's not just about using the retail version of communication DNA. You can really embed that and make it a much more impactful part of your business. And there's been sort of a trend, and we've been seeing it over the last few years, but really around behavioral marketing. And I mentioned that earlier, and I think companies use personas. They develop, sort of their data, their big data approach of how they actually will communicate with clients. And they got a lot of external information that can help at least determine some of the characteristics of what that communication would look like. We've seen before a little bit more of that left brain approach, transaction analysis, spending patterns, income, demographics. All those are sort of patterns of spending and behavior that, that might help you determine some things. But when you use more of that right brain personality approach using a psychographic process like communication DNA, you can actually, your high confidence level around matching employees and your clients, developing sort of the right expertise around emotional engagement, customizing the information based on that learning preference. And that's when you really get much more of that 23% lift, because you're actually targeting the right information for the right messaging for that client. And it does build loyalty and referrals. And the way that communication DNA works, so again, a cloud-based system, but it really does, it's a pretty easy process. If you use a retail version, it's still pretty easy. We use self-registration links, or a lot of companies just put it on their website, and it helps build prospect. It can be used for prospecting clients. It can actually be used in seminars. Quite often I've seen a recent trend in that around seminars, educating people around their communication differences. And then it's sort of routed through depending on what they want in a workflow environment. We are connected to Salesforce in the App Store, and it's communication DNA. If you're actually working with clients, understanding what they need, what's disclosed in the client record, and then matching those employees that actually are going to service the client, sort of on that matching principle. Everything can be accessed through sort of cloud-based mobile apps. So it's really interesting to see it, and the investment's pretty low to be able to get the maximum value that you get with behavioral insights. And this is just a picture of the questionnaire. It's not exactly how it looks today, but it's a forced choice model. It takes about 2 to 5 minutes to take. Pretty simple. It can be taken on an iPad or a mobile device, and you actually are asked your most like and least like. And that's what really helps develop that communication, that pattern that'll sort of at the end of the process helps an individual understand, even in their own self-development, what their communication need is. And here we have one of the deliverable reports. We call it the premium report. And you can see in this particular case, Chris Coddington, he is one of our test cases that we work with quite a bit. You can see his goal setting is pretty high at 64. which would suggest that Chris Coddington is definitely somebody that sets goals, pretty confident. You can see here his stability. Communication need is 27. So just even on the limited information that I've provided, if you actually approached Chris Coddington and talked to him about, how is your family? What do how are the family relationships? That probably would either lead to a lot of distrust for him, because he's wondering what you're fishing for, because he wants to get to a little bit more of the rational discussion, or let's just get down to business. But Chris's wife, and we do know this, is going to be opposite to him, and her stability was really high. So I don't have it in this chart, but it just shows how you actually have to know these things. And he does like, at 55, certain information is important. Don't withhold information. Lifestyle is 46, not above 50, so it's probably lesser of a concern, but the stability, you don't really even have to spend that much time on. And this shows that report, and it gives you not only just the numbers, but tips and communication keys to be able to work with Chris and how he learns, and even a conversation starter. It's great to be able to use these reports for that benefit of enabling communication. So I'm going to cover for the next couple of slides a little bit about those strengths of each of the 4 profiles, and then we'll go into the struggle. So for communication strengths, you can see, again, they're pretty direct communicators, these these goal setters. They're thinking about the what, what has success been, because it's about goals. For your lifestyle, who's involved, that's going to be pretty important to them. If you don't sort of connect with them on a personal level, like who they know, they may feel like it's just too rigid and too rational. Then when you get down to your information types, logical, why, they want to know steps, they probably want to know data and details, and they really want to know, sort of one of the questions, if they've got a new idea, what have they been reading lately, because they do read a lot. And then for the stability types, how, this is around that harmonious environment, strength of family, demonstrating empathy and warmth, but they're concerned about how time with the family. It's going to be very important for them. So those are the strengths. The struggles for each of these, for somebody that's, really kind of moving things along, these folks get very sort of targeted, quick, direct, sometimes abrupt. They need to learn to soften up. For the lifestyles, learn to allow others to talk, because they can be pretty gregarious, outgoing, may leave everybody else behind. For the information types, learning to be flexible, because they can tend to be a little bit rigid, especially if they start distrusting. And then for the stability types, helping them really around learning to speak up, because they probably have some great ideas, but because the others in the room might be overpowering them, they don't feel like they've got a voice. So some very subtle things on these struggles, really encouraging them to either tone it down or increase, or to speak more. So communication and learning styles, the folks at the top of this, which are your goal setter and lifestyle, give pretty quick fixes. They sort of don't need long, drawn-out details. That's how they work. They like opportunities. They want to get to the bottom line. They want to discuss. That's how they learn, when they discuss. For your lifestyle, you really want, because they tend to be intuitive learners, they like broad facts. They like to see it. These folks like to discuss it, the goal setters. For your information types, they want to read it. Anything you do in a pre-read will help them understand it, and it'll help build trust. And they learn if it's truly tangible. And then your stability types around that sensory learning, allow them to feel it, keep it relaxed, keep it harmonious. It's going to really be high impact when they feel like they've got a voice. And for the ones down at the bottom of this, procedural is going to be important. You got your left brain over here, and then your right brain over on the right. And so those 4, you can really enable communication in a sort of in an organization or when you're working with a team. Another poll question, number 3.
And just trying to keep everybody up to speed, make it easy that we're covering all our points. So the communication insights include which of the following? And we're looking at the communication strengths, the struggles, the keys, and then a key factor there is the learning styles. So realizing that just covered all that, and it looks like everybody is on the same page. Thank you so much.
Strengths, struggles, and communication keys, and a learning element as well. It's important to know that.
Thank you.
So there's one of the tools that's part of this tool set. We call it the meeting guide. We always have, so the one thing that benefits by going through this communication DNA is meeting tips for each one of these. This is a really good guide. Even if you get this presentation and you sort of know you're working with a goal setter, use this page 27. Can enable a lot of communication. With the goal setter, don't tell long, drawn-out stories that can really bore them, and they're thinking about what to get to the next goal. Lay out the options so a decision can be made. That's going to be really important. And then, actually providing bullets can be very sort of through getting them through things pretty quickly. And then risk and rewards, very important with the goal setter. And all this information is disclosed in the report. So if we've got these 4 people and Frank is a goal setter in the center here, then each one of them would need to adapt a bit. So Chris, who's also a goal setter, they actually probably would have no issues, it'd be pretty quick, probably tend to be a high level, not a lot of detail. You get John, who's a lifestyle, that could be problematic at times. And then the stability type would require a lot of adaptation for the stability types, because Frank is going to be pretty direct to the point, get things done, where Sarah may need a little more detail and wouldn't be necessarily comfortable to ask for it. Might feel like it's a bad question, be a little bit reserved to ask. And then for information, for Laura here, she may not get enough information from there, but she might be able to adapt it. And in the way that this works here is if you're actually polar opposite to somebody like these two would be on the cross section, harder to communicate with. Same thing for the lifestyle and the information. Those would be the more difficult ones to connect with. When you're in the same quadrant, it tends to be a little easier, but when you're opposite side on the quadrant, it's going to be more difficult. So that's just a good rule of thumb. So if you got Craig, who's, let's say he's the leader, and he's a stability type, so you can imagine with this, if he is, lots of adaptation needed, because Chris is going to be the leader, or he's the leader, to actually communicate with Chris. This one would probably be fine. This one's minimal adaptation. This one would probably be fine, but they're in the same quadrant. You can see where the opposites can be a little more challenging. But we've actually done a little bit of work here around adapting communication. And this slide also is a great one on page 30 that'll actually walk you through for each one of the styles. There's 16 of them represented here. If I'm a goal setter working with the stability, these are things that can really help enable communication. Very easy to understand, not a lot of words. I'd say that people really make a lot of breakthroughs just by concentrating on this. It's a great chart. Same thing if it's stability type meeting with the information. Definitely, be reliable, show up on time, focus on being structured, recognize they could get irritated because just, the lifestyle person just does not provide a lot of information. They want to be very high level because they've got to get to the next event or, connect with somebody new. So these are a really good chart to be able to use, and this is how we actually teach using communication DNA, simply through this matrix and the one I showed before. And then there's a cool feature in the system that runs a team report or a group report, and it shows everybody in the team. If they have a primary and a secondary, will show up if it's pretty strong. We saw that with Chris Coddington. He had that higher information at 55. Shows both of their communication preferences, but you can see some people don't have a secondary because they're so strong in this information that they that they don't really have a secondary. And then it's charted on this wheel of how the representation of each one of them. And you'll probably see a color here that you didn't see before, adaptive. So adaptive is kind of an interesting profile. It's a blend of all four of them. So it's a pretty rare, you don't see a lot of them. I think they represent about 6% of the population. But they do have elements of all four that are fairly moderately, to strong, but they're all in the same range. So they really don't have a strong preference either way. So when you see an adaptive that comes through the system, just recognize you can really communicate based on any of the four others. And they will show up in an organization, they usually do. And here you'll see the overlay for goal setter, information, stability, and lifestyle. And you'll see there that they still fall in the same quadrant, but this is overlaid to what we call that natural behavior discovery. That's that longer, that 46 question discovery, which gets very deep and to get into behavioral biases, but it shows you directionally where you see these, in the quadrants where these communication DNA profiles usually show up. Now there are occasions when communication might be a little different than the natural behavior, but it's pretty slight. So you can have, if I'm a goal setter, more likely I'm going to be an initiator or a strategist or an influencer. And I mentioned Tripp and I are both initiators, and we both have a primary goal setter style. So it just falls in line with that directionally. We talked a little bit earlier about behavioral technology. It does transform firms. We've done it a number of times, and we use our retail version. That's sort of our model that we use every day. But the firms that actually invest in technology transformation around having that profile embedded into their company and actually using it in a workflow have really great results, because it's so easy. As you can see in just the few minutes that we've been on the call, I've educated you on the 4 types and even that 5th type, the adaptive. But you can see how simple it is. The power of it really does come from actually going through and making a decision as a company that this is what we want to do. We want a much more client-centered approach to our connections with our people and our clients and our employees. And when you do that, this other is actually pretty easy to implement. You can really grow your firm and have a much better culture that's behaviorally smart when you actually implement a solution. And it doesn't have to be communication DNA. There are other tools. But I will say, on the innovation side, that's, I think, where we really excel on that digital integration. We've got one more poll question coming up.
All right, so far, can we use communication insights to help understand employee-client styles and help deepen those relationships? So I think made that one pretty easy, and it looks like everyone's pretty much
great. Excellent.
Thank you, Leon, for making that so easy.
And I'm a big believer that when you're even cognizant of it, even if you're not using a behavioral tool, a lot of times even the little bit of information we covered can be enlightening. You can start seeing patterns of behavior with people just by knowing the little bit we've covered today. And we actually spend a lot of time and effort around educating the clients that we work with, and certainly organizations that we work with, around behavioral technology, these resources. We've got a number of case studies that we have on the website, testimonials, using communication DNA with customer segmentation, customizing those messages, which can be pretty simple. Sounds like it could be complex, but quite honestly, it's fairly simple if there's a commitment to doing it. solution mapping, and then behavioral marketing. Those are all sort of the benefits of using a program like Communication DNA. And if you aren't familiar with those, I encourage you to just click on the hyperlink and review those. And then a little bit about our company. The company is actually DNA Behavior, and we have 3 solutions that we work with, and we work much more on integration of these digital insights. And you can see here behavioralizing marketing and sales. The company's been around since 2001, and we actually use behaviorally smart sort of terms, using it for know, engage, and grow every client relationship. And then one of the things around behavioral matching, we talked about that earlier, even in a workflow, and I've had many examples when somebody started using our program of them calling within like 2 days later where they've made a huge gain with the client or closed a deal that they just were struggling with. And these insights can be pretty powerful. So it's even though it sounds pretty simple, you can get a lot of data and help really move your client or move your organization to that much more client-centered program that you're looking for. And then we measure in our natural behavior process those 64 factors. That's the main line of what we do. The company has been around again since 2001. Our research team, we do an annual validation process at the end of the year, and directionally everything continues to be very much like it was when we launched. As far as like we measure how many initiators we have in the system, how many goal setters we have in the system. That directionally does not change, but we do have about 1 million plus profiles in our system. We're in 123 countries. Our profile has been completed in 11 different languages. So a lot of behavioral science around these discoveries. So when organizations work with us, there's a high level of assurance, of implementing this solution that you'll get a lot of great insights to move the organization on these relationships. We have one more poll question.
Just like to see what other topics people might be interested in learning more about. So just here a small cross-section of topics we've covered in the past or may cover here shortly, but the sales and marketing engagement, which plays right into Communication DNA, affecting corporate cultural change. We do that with the Business DNA platform, but again, it comes down to communication. Team performance, leadership development, certified behavioral performance advisor, that all comes together. There is a certification within Communication DNA, but then also business. So pretty good cross-section of opportunities there, and more if you want to reach out and engage us. We'll happy to share those resources readily with the team. So good cross-section there. Yeah, leadership development, certified
Performance
advisor.
And we've done that one.
Absolutely.
Corporate culture. So they're all pretty people. Okay.
Corporate culture, I think, is one of the more hot buttons as of late, and we'll see that one coming up in the new year as we move forward. So thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Trip. And this is the last webinar that we're having for 2017. So you get the honor and privilege of being part of it. We do appreciate it. But as Trip mentioned, we really do focus a lot of attention on that education. So any feedback that you have, if you do take the survey at the end of this, we look at that information because it does help us build our calendar for the next year. We do a lot of speaking engagements on this behavioral science. Communication DNA is so simple and easy to use. We really do invite everybody to take your trial, and the link is there. It's a hyperlink that you can actually click on. You will get an email probably within the next 15 minutes that'll actually have an abbreviated trial link that you can actually click on and complete those 12 questions. And you get your information, and Trip's email is in there if you wanted to have a conversation with him or with me. We're certainly here to be able to provide insight into how that's used or how other people are using it. We also have the website there, which is communicationdna.com. Our blog site, which we keep fresh content. We do about 3 blogs a month. And then we have our podcast channel, and we focused on communication DNA, I don't know, maybe a month and a half ago. So it's a great little podcast, about 17 minutes. And with that, we've honored our agreement to keep you to the top of the hour, about 10 minutes till. So you will get the survey right after this, but we encourage you, if there are no questions, we will...
We covered everything along the way. Most of the questions are along the lines of people wanting to take their profile, in which we encourage and then even open up that we will do a review of it based on, we set aside some time to fill a calendar space to have those conversations with our attendees. And so if you get in there within the next couple of days, we can manage that time and enjoy the engagement for sure. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. We really do appreciate the support. I've noticed, I looked over the list, and there's several of you that have been on other webinars. We always appreciate that. I know this was a little bit different than what we do in our traditional behavioral finance, so it's been fun. So it's a great sort of offering. Hope to hear from you, and if not, hopefully hear from you in a webinar in January. We start the new year. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody.